Like it or not, the senior and elderly population is vulnerable to negligence committed by medical professionals, nursing home and assisted living facilities, pharmaceutical and medical device companies, insurance companies, and everyday individuals and businesses. The Injured Senior Podcast is here to help. Steve Heisler is the creator of the National Injured Senior Law Center and has been advocating for seniors' rights for over 20 years. You have questions, and Steve Heisler has answers. This is the Injured Senior Podcast.
Top of the day, everyone in the Injured Senior community. I am attorney Steve Heisler, founder and CEO of the National Injured Senior Law Center, and I am coming to you from my Oriole room, that's a baseball team, from my basement at home here in, that's right, Baltimore, Maryland. You are tuned into the Injured Senior Podcast, where we educate and discuss issues of importance to the injured senior and injured elderly population, as well as to the children and loved ones of the injured senior and elderly population. Another purpose of the podcast is to educate the injured senior and elderly population about how not to become an injured senior or elder. I am your humble host, and I am so glad to be with you today. First, a program note. I'm really excited to let everyone know in the injured senior community about two guests who have committed to appear on this podcast in the coming weeks. One is Dr. Sam Sugar. Dr. Sugar is a licensed physician and president of the Americans Against Abusive Probate Guardianship, or AAPG. He's recently written a book, Guardianships and the Elderly, The Perfect Crime. Now, if you remember, we had Billy Mintz, the maker of the film The Guardians, which is about elder abuse via probate guardianships by public guardians. And I'm sure it got everybody pretty worked up and incensed. So if you're elderly or you're the loved one of an elderly individual, you will definitely want to hear what Dr. Sugar has to say. So I'm very excited to have him on the show. We also have Father Thomas Doyle on the show in the next few weeks. Father Tom warned the Catholic Church back in the early 1980s about the church's sexual abuse epidemic, and he paid heavily for it. He has since become an advocate for individuals who have been sexually abused by clergy, and he will speak about that on the episode that we have him coming on in the next couple of weeks. So good things are happening here on the Injured Senior Podcast, and we're so happy that you are hopefully a subscriber and listening to all this good content. So today we have Colin Hoobler on the show to talk about what he calls sitting disease and how it impacts the senior and elderly population. So sitting or lying down for too long increases your risk of chronic health problems, such as heart disease, diabetes, some cancers. It can also be harmful to your mental health. New research published in the Journal of Physical Activity and Health reports that prolonged sitting puts people over 60 at risk for disabilities, and that should be of some concern to our listenership. Elderly adults spend approximately 2/3 of their day sedentary, which is about 9 hours a day. Folks, that is alarming. So Colin has been nice enough to come on our show today to talk to us, like I said, about sitting disease. He is a doctor of physical therapy, and he's been a doctor of physical therapy for 19 years. He is an author and trainer, the creator and host of the Action 30 podcast, as well as the fitness show on PBS. He's a medical expert for his local NBC affiliate. And by the way, Injured Senior community, he is out in Oregon. So I'm here in Baltimore, so he is literally on the other coast. He's a health writer for the Oregonian newspaper, and he's the founder and CEO of S3 Balance LLC, and he will talk a little bit about that later on in the episode. Well, welcome to the show, Colin. It's so glad to have you here. How are you?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing great. So glad to have you on. So, can you tell our injured senior community how serious a problem sitting and remaining sedentary is to the aging population?
Sure. What I'm going to do, I'm going to make this relative to what everybody can understand, which is, do you think that smoking's kind of bad for you?
Oh, of course. I never smoked it. I might have once or twice when I, back in my college days, held a cigarette in my hand and because that made me look cool, but I never smoked. For the
Yeah.
record.
So there's a thing we coin now in medicine called sitting disease, which is that sitting carries the same or greater risk, actually greater risk than smoking a pack of cigarettes every day. So if you're a non-smoker, but you decide to be sedentary and sit, 8 to 10 hours a day, which most seniors do, unfortunately, especially if you're in a community like memory care or assisted living, then you're basically, if you're a non-smoker, you are adding risk to your life. It's basically like smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. But on top of that, you're talking about increased risk of suicide, increased risk of chronic pain, osteoporosis, Parkinson's, diabetes. I mean, the list is so long. You're definitely going to fall more, but probably worst of all, that there's a strong link between sitting that much and becoming disabled. So you will no longer be able to care for yourself in almost, in a short amount of time.
So isn't it a double-edged sword? Kind of like you've got a lot of seniors who say, well, I have to sit a lot because, my knees ache or I've got a back problem. So it's just better to sit. So if I don't sit and I stand, then I'm putting myself at risk for a fall and a broken hip. Do you hear that a lot from your patients?
Yeah, I hear that a lot, even from non-patients, especially in independent living where they're supposed to be independent and staff is not supposed to be able to touch the residents. So they need to be able to get up on their own. They got to be able to walk on their own. And it's saying that, well, I can't stand up because I'm afraid this will happen is extremely understandable. I understand that the fear is there, but let's look at why that's the case. That's the case because you are sitting too much. So yes, there is a greater risk initially for a fall. There's a greater risk for discomfort initially. But what I see 100% of the time, over and over again, is you do it once, even if you have somebody stand up for 20 to 30 seconds and they sit back down because they just got tired. The next time they get up, even if it's a minute or two later, they get up faster and then they don't want to sit down. So then they're up 200 to 300% more time the second time. And it's just this thing that just keeps going downhill. It's like a snowball. So really the key is, how do you just initiate that process? Because people that complain of back pain or knee pain, you're basically just putting gasoline on that fire by continuing to sit, because your tissues, they just start to become more and more deformed. They become less parallel. So they become more disorganized so that when you do stand up, they pull more. And that's what creates pain. And so even if you have something like osteoarthritis of your knees, very, very common as you age, right? 80, 85 years old, people say, well, I can't, walking hurts, that kind of thing. Well, sitting will make that worse. So what you do is you use the chair as a means to rest briefly, but not as the means for your daily, what you're doing on a daily basis. And Dr. Levine, he's an MD, PhD over at the Mayo Clinic. He said, and I quote, "We are sitting ourselves to death. We're wrapping our older adults in cellophane and putting them in a chair. And that is what needs to happen to mitigate risk of falls and that kind of thing. But inadvertently, you're not keeping them safe. You're killing them. And you're killing them slowly over time and making them more disabled."
Yeah, I don't think that the senior and elderly population really takes that very seriously. I think that you can tell them that, but just from talking to my injured senior community and my clients, I'm an attorney and I do a lot of represent a lot of seniors and elders, and a lot of them just like to sit. So, how do we get them to change the behavior?
It depends on the person, but there is one term that tends to resonate with seniors more than anything else, and that is wheelchair.
Yeah.
And if you want to make yourself disabled, so you want to make it so you have to depend on others, which that whole concept is very painful, not just for older adults, but young, middle-aged, old kids. There's something about losing your autonomy that is devastating from a human standpoint that is really, it's not tolerable. So I think if we phrase it as, well, oh, you don't want to get up? Okay, that's fine. That's your right. You do not have to do anything. But it's very important that you realize by not getting up, you are speeding up, you're accelerating your rate of disability. I've seen that. I was at a retirement community where an older adult was only 74 years old, came in independent, within 2 years, wheelchair. Not due to any other reason other than sitting 8 to 10 hours a day. I mean, it's really the silent killer. It's kind of like blood pressure, right? Blood pressure, you can't see it, but you don't mess with those numbers. And we know doctors will say, you got to keep that under 120/80. I mean, we got to get those numbers down because your risk of stroke is too high.
Right. There's no blood test for inactivity.
No, but there are tests for balance, right? There are tests for A1C, which is a measure for diabetes, right? You want to keep your A1Cs, got to keep that low. And there are other tests that, the more you sit, you will become less and less independent. Do you like using a walker? Sit more, and that will turn into a wheelchair eventually.
Yeah, kind of like a reverse psychology in a lot of time. But what do you mean I don't want a wheelchair? So maybe you got to kind of raise the ante and say, look, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. This will accelerate your decline.
Exactly. And, this is not an infomercial for my device, but that's why I invented a device so that seniors, if they live alone or they're in retirement homes, that they have something that they can transfer, they can stand up, they can lean on the device as much as they want, but then they can basically stand and do standing balance exercises by themselves. And that's the thing. It's really keeping autonomy, because once you lose that, what you lose is choices. You lose choices. And, I can't do that now. I can't do this now. Now I got to have somebody open a ketchup bottle for me. Now I got to have somebody help me just to go to the bathroom. Those are humiliating and devastating things to have happen.
So do you think that, and I know you're going to think this is kind of a ridiculous question, but do you think that television has anything to do with it? Because statistically, the senior and elderly population, they don't have a lot to do, and so they watch a lot of television.
Yeah.
You take away the TV, then maybe, I'm not advocating taking away the television, but I'm saying that that TV is something that kind of keeps them sedentary because,
Well, I think it also depends on what's on TV. If they're sitting there watching Fox News all day, or just something that's, and I don't mean to pick on Fox News. Actually, yeah, I do intend to pick on. But a lot of times, if they're watching a TV program that doesn't initiate any movement, that they're literally sitting there watching TV for 4 or 5 hours, and they're like, well, I guess I got to get to go to the bathroom. And they come back, and then they reset another 4 or 5 hours.
Right.
That's what we're talking about. That's devastating. They got to get up.
Every senior should be required to have the Jane Fonda workout DVD or whatever, or Richard Simmons grooving to the oldies. But right, it's what you watch. If you've got something which is going to get you to stand up and do a little bit of exercise.
Well, I find that the generation now, so 70s, 80s and beyond, what they respond best to? Dancing.
Really?
They miss dancing and all the different kinds of dancing. So if they can grab some of that fire, just a little bit, it's still there. They're still competitive with others. That doesn't go away. If they can find ways to just get up, anything in standing, whether it's dancing, doing your balance moves, whatever it is, but the Jane Fonda thing and the Richard Simmons, that tends to be too advanced, especially for them to get started, right?
Got it.
It's not really designed for older adults.
More like Tai Chi or gentle yoga.
Yeah, Tai Chi is great, or that kind of thing. But for free, you can go to s3balance.com, and it's free. You can look and click on exercises, and there are over 40 or 50 videos of exercises they can do. Now they're using the S3 device. You don't have to have the S3 device. You can do it with a loved one where a loved one just stands there with their arms out and is touching you to prevent you from falling. And you know what will happen? You won't need that person after doing that for too long. It's extremely powerful and very fulfilling to see that happen. Every time you do it, you get better.
Yeah, that's great information. Let me ask you this, Colin. So 1 to 2 million of our senior and elderly population are in assisted living or nursing homes. Do you think there's any responsibility on the part of the nursing homes or the assisted livings to kind of be a little more proactive in getting their residents or the patients to move around a little bit more?
Not a little accountability, a lot of accountability. Because as it stands right now, I love that question, because right now, if Steve owns his own memory care unit or assisted living, the law states that you only need to provide activities. There's no rule that you need to educate or get people up. So as long as you provide these types of services, that's enough for the law. But it's not enough for me, and it's not enough for the residents and their families, because they still sit all day long. So I think the first step with these communities, whether it's assisted living, memory care, skilled nursing, they owe it to their residents to, number one, they got to educate them so that they make an informed decision. Rather than, how are you? Are you 100% comfortable? Great, stay sitting there. No, you've got to find out, Sharon, what do you like to do every day? Well, we've got to get you up and doing that every day, because if you don't use it, you lose it. And I just started a coalition, by the way. I just did that last week. It's called the Coalition for Active Residents in Engagement, and it's CARE. And I'm going to start legislating. I'm going to start pushing for legislation to hold these communities more accountable. We need to have stricter standards for education to avoid the ignorant and devastating policies that they have now. Just, well, if they get up, that's fine. If they don't, that's fine too.
No, sorry to interrupt you, but that's really exciting. And if I know you're going to start in Oregon, and hopefully you'll move east and you come to Maryland. You've got a partner here, because the Injured Senior Law Center, National Injured Senior Law Center, we work on advocating on behalf of our seniors and our elderly, and that includes legislation.
Well, you're top of my list to add to this, because I've got 29 physicians, several physical therapists. I've got a bunch of different healthcare experts, but what we need is somebody like you that can help us draft that kind of language, because this is something that we can no longer afford to do, because we're going to be there one day. Whether you've got a parent that is in one of these communities or heading there, we're heading in this age, to be that age soon. And if we don't provide some level of protection, some voice to hold these communities accountable, the wheelchair example really resonates with me. I can't get it out of my head when I think about this, because I've seen it, and I've seen it over and over, and not for any other reason. Well, did you fall? No. Well, what did you do the last 2 years? Well, I watched TV and I sat around. I did nothing.
So let me ask you this, Colin, and by the way, this is really, really good stuff, and I'm hoping our listeners are really taking good notes. But do you think the role of medication plays a part of this sedentary lifestyle for people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s?
Yeah, you need to look no further than the research on that one. The research says that the vast majority of older adults are grossly over-medicated. And for example, I think hormone replacement therapy or blood pressure medication. Well, a lot of these cause fatigue. A lot of them can, and they stake, and these people are on the medications for far too long, and the doctors are not proactive enough to not just get them to wean them off the medication, but to do so in a way that couples it with the most powerful medication we have, which is exercise in standing. So the medication piece, it's the responsibility too of the doctors, the geriatricians. There are some fantastic geriatricians that they will only medicate to a point, knowing that they're going to motivate the person to exercise, and then that exercise will take the place of the medication. But that doesn't happen very often. The research says that less than 25% of the time that physicians even mention exercise, even to the elderly. It's just not something that's done. So we have to change this whole, it's like racism, right? We've got to start, in order to get away from that, you got to face it and acknowledge that it is a problem. And ageism is a big problem. We stigmatize, we pigeonhole people. Well, you're old, so you need to just not burden me with your problems. Sit there and then just enjoy your last years of life. Your last years of life need to be spent in vertical, not horizontal. I mean, life's too valuable to skip.
Well, you know, when my grandparents were in their 70s, it was kind of like, that was really, really old back in, you know, in the 1980s or whatever. But now, I mean, I'm going to be 59 in a couple of weeks, and you know, 70 is kind of down the road there. I can kind of see a glimmer of it. But like, one of the things that I decided to do a couple of years ago, when I had heard this sitting is the new smoking, is I went ahead and got a standing desk. And because, you know, I'm not a laborer, I don't do heavy labor in my job. So I was sitting a lot. You know, I was sitting really 8 hours a day. So I decided to get a standing desk. And, you know, in fact, I don't have one at home. I work at home too. So I kind of like put like a box, and I put my computer on top of that. So I stand right now as we're conducting this podcast interview. I'm standing. So
I thought you were pretty tall.
Yeah, all 5'6.5" of me. So do you see now that the individuals who are in their 50s might be a little more open to more activity, or are not as sedentary, or are you seeing still the individuals who are, you know, on deck to become the senior and elderly population? Are they just as guilty as the 70 and 80-year-olds?
Yeah, but it's a generational thing. The older generation, they're in the age range, right, that occurred before the fitness boom. So it just wasn't really the thing, especially women. So they don't really, a lot of them tend not to have that mindset, but they're smart people. They're influential. They follow what each other what they do. And so if you can get them to motivate each other, especially in communities, get one person to lead classes, and please don't do it in sitting. That's defeating the whole purpose. I mean, how many times you go into these communities and there's 5 chairs in a circle, and I just shake my head and go, what's the point? I mean, it may increase circulation a little bit, but all it really is there for is to appease the administration, to be able to say we offer activities. It really doesn't do much of anything. It doesn't reduce falls. It doesn't do any of that. When
somebody who's been used to sitting 9 hours a day, when they begin to transition to trying to be more active and standing, is it okay for them to start with a walker or crutches or whatever, or, you know, just something to get them up on their feet?
Yeah, it depends on how low level they are. If they can walk with a walker now, they need to walk with a walker more. So rather than just going to and from the bathroom or just around the house, it's time to start thinking about leaving the house or going around the house more. But it's like putting money in the bank, only more powerful than money. Because once you lose your independence, and you can feel it happening, you know, you start to realize, boy, things are getting harder. It's getting harder to tie my shoes. It's getting harder to go, and I'm becoming more nervous going to the airport or leaving my home. It's starting to happen, and you got to do something.
That's powerful. Yeah, that's really powerful. Do you have, I know you gave an example about the 74-year-old in the nursing home who now was unable to walk. In your private practice or just in your travels, can you give some other examples of maybe some case studies of someone that you had that either, you know, started as someone who was unable to walk, but then, you know, now is a success story? Or
yeah, there's actually a video of that. There was a woman, 84 years old, had a stroke and was not treated, in my opinion, with the active mindset. So she, rather than going right into therapy, and the first 6 months following a stroke are the most critical, right? That's when you can get the most out of the brain. That's when you can get the most out of the muscles, so to speak. And I got her 2 months after, and we went to work, and no more walker. She can ascend, descend stairs. She was in a wheelchair. And I don't want credit for that. That woman did what it took. All I did was just kind of point my finger and encourage her. I'll never forget that, because we're in the clinic that we have these stairs. She looked at the stairs and she cried. She says, I want to do it, but I just can't. In only 8 weeks, she was going up and down that whole 2 flights of stairs. I think it was 48 steps, up and down, no problem. And just really remarkable to see what can happen when your brain is in the right mindset.
So, Colin, you should trademark your system and get it to as many physicians around the country and say, look, but it sounds like to me, not only is it a physical thing, but it's also more mental. It's like,
yeah, your body is a slave to your brain. So the sooner that you recognize that and realize your biggest limitation is what you think it is, not what it actually is.
Right.
So stop being lazy, get over yourself, hold yourself accountable, and watch the magic happen, because it is magic.
Yeah. With all that being said, we might have some listeners, members of our injured senior community who might be a little confused. Well, how much sitting is okay? So what would you say is, for somebody who is being active, how much sitting should they be doing regularly, without having any negative effects?
We don't have an answer to that question yet. We have the kind of the ceiling of what we know can really create problems, right? The 8 to 10 hours, we know that is devastating. But what we don't have yet, to my knowledge, we don't have, okay, well, is it okay to sit a couple hours a day? My offhand anecdotal response is sure. I mean, you have stuff you got to do. We've got to write. We've got to do other things. And there's no sin to watch TV, folks. It's not like that, TV, kill your television. No, you can actually get a lot of good things out of your television. But what I think people need to realize is once you sit down, I think now what we do know is if you can get up every 30 minutes, we do know that will go a long way against sitting disease. So get up, even if it's only for, a minute or two, to disrupt that cycle of sitting is enough to really start to make a dent in that.
That's great. And I guess, is there any type of activity that is more beneficial than others, or so if you had to recommend a couple of types of activity or exercises to do, what would they be?
So if you go to the S3Balance web.com, S3Balance.com again, and go to exercises, at the top it's free and you don't need any equipment but your kitchen counter. And what you can do with that is start to strengthen your quads. The quads or your thigh muscles, those are probably the most important muscles, right? Because if those are weak, you can't stand up very well. Your fall risk goes way up, and it increases knee pain, increases back pain. So I'd say the first step, if you really want to get a big bang for your buck, learn to do a safe squat. Now, that doesn't mean that you're squatting down to your butt, almost touches the floor, going really deep. No, it's only going at tops 50 degrees of knee bend. That's it, because that helps protect the knee. And even if you just go down 10 degrees, just to start to load those quads a little bit to get some burn in your thighs, make sure your hips stay back, as I say in the video, that can really start to stack the deck in your favor. So you can start to get a taste of what this medication is like. Because it's not working out, people. It is actual medication. That's what people have to start to understand. If you're tired, if you have chronic pain, if you have trouble with falls, if you have diabetes, if you have osteoporosis, osteoarthritis, this is the most powerful medication we have for you. And any doctor can acknowledge that. It's all in the research. Don't take it from me. Go into the research and look at the articles that are there. But I think that's a really great start. It only takes, 2 to 3 minutes a day, and start to build from there. But watch the videos, because I take you through why you're doing what you're doing. And I use my mom as the model. She's 75. Definitely does not look 75. She's extremely active.
Did mom get compensated for that appearance on?
I gave her a big hug afterwards. And that was good for her.
Yeah, that's good. That's good to hear. I do yoga, but my yoga has kind of transitioned over to, it's still yoga, but it's a lot of stretching.
Yeah.
And usually the stretching is on the ground. Is that still something which is beneficial to, to a person?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. No, stretching, especially the hamstrings, your hips, your pecs, for posture. The problem is a lot of times that stretching, if you're taking 40 minutes to stretch or half an hour to stretch, that I don't really follow unless you're willing on top of that to do the added 20 or 30 minutes of strengthening, then you have a good balance. Because kind of look at it like with a diet, right? If I tell you, well, I'm mostly just eating carbs. Well, you're eating protein? No, not really. Well, you intuitively know there's something not right about that. So exercise is a lot like diet in that way. You need a balance of strength, flexibility, endurance, and then the fourth piece is body composition, or how chubby you are, right? The ratio of fat to muscle. But if you do the first three well and you have a good diet, you don't have to worry about the fourth. It'll just take care of itself. Yeah. But I find that the strength piece is almost always neglected, not just in older folks, but in younger folks. Now, how do you know if it's a strengthening activity? Just answer this question. Well, how long can you do it? How long can you go for? So is swimming a strengthening activity? No, because you can do it for longer than 45 seconds or a minute, right? Well, what about walking? No, that's not a strengthening activity because you can do it for longer. Now, if you're really low level, right, and you're struggling, you're in the hospital, suddenly that becomes a strengthening activity because, oh my goodness, I can't walk longer than. So it's really important that you have that strengthening piece. It's just as important. And here's the thing with dementia, we know that doing adequate strengthening, it helps preserve the white matter in your brain, and it actually can reverse effects from dementia. That it can actually start to preserve and rewire your brain to improve your cognition.
Oh, that's really good stuff. That's good information. Yeah, I mean, dementia is becoming an epidemic.
Yeah, and like chronic pain too. A lot of these people have chronic pain. The common denominator is not opioids. It is not these forms of drugs, right? It's not acupuncture. It's exercise, because they're showing now that the enzymes in your brain as well as in the periphery, so your arms, your legs, that's what's so exciting about this, is that if you get the intensity right and you do the exercise properly, it acts like you're basically injecting heroin into your body as far as a pain modulator. That's the power of exercise. It can really reduce chronic pain. Yeah. The question is, where do you start? You got to start slowly and make sure that you're staying within your envelope of function. Even if you're only spending 5 minutes a day, who cares? Next week, it'll be 10. The following week, it'll be 15.
Right. You gotta crawl before you walk, So it's like, just incrementally.
Hardest part.
Yeah. So one of those core exercises you recommend is the squats.
I'd start there and then kind of work your way out. But please make sure you watch that video, either at action30.com under the videos link, or watch it at the s3balance.com under the exercises link. Because if you squat too low, for example, we know that the forces on the knees and the spine, they exponentially go up and you can hurt yourself. If you squat down and your knees go forward, which almost everybody does, then the forces go up in the knees again. And then plus it's too easy. You're like, well, this is kind of a waste of time. So it's really important that you get that balance between training the muscles but preserving your joints. If you don't do that, you're going to find, oh, crud, it's either my knees are hurting, my back is hurting, so I'm not doing what Colin said, or I'm not going to do what Colin said because it's too easy. It's a waste of time. I'm not getting anything out of it.
All right. And so for our injured senior community to get access to those videos, they have to go to the website, correct?
Yeah, they go to, and either one, action30.com, I think has and it's actually called Beat the Virus. Because of the isolation, people are having to spend time in their homes. They can't, and I did that, for our senior living communities that have S3 Balance. I designed it for them because they can't use S3 right now, or even the ones that don't have S3. I don't care. You've got to get these people up every day, right? So they're trapped in your home. This is a great way to disrupt that devastating cycle of sitting. Right. And it's called Beat the Virus. It's 3 videos. There's 1, 2, and 3. And the third one, if you're chair bound for whatever reason, I show what to do in a chair. But if you're doing that in a chair, please make sure that you have your one eye on the prize, which is I'm going to be getting up.
Right. The objective is to get out of the chair eventually.
You have to. The chair is poison. Too much of it. Yeah.
So to go to the website, they go to action30.com.
Yep. Or s3balance.com.
Okay.
And then they can click on the exercises
and
piece.
look for Beat the Virus.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. And it's a 3-part video. And here's the thing. I even loaded little guide sheets with pictures. So you can just print that off if you can. And you can either follow the video or you can print off the little PDF one sheet and then follow along.
That's awesome. So you've got this podcast, Action 30, and we want to encourage our injured senior community to also listen to your podcast. I've listened to several episodes, and there are some really, really good information on there. So can you just tell them briefly a little bit about the podcast?
The goal is just in 30 minutes or less to give you some really tangible skills, basically. Knowledge is one thing, but really to instill the motivation and the education to do what we've been talking, with Stephen here about for the last, half hour. It's really, where do you start? Why should you do this? What do other experts say about this? And as you know, I've got these experts as guests on my show because I think it's more, it adds more credibility. I definitely don't know it all, and I want different viewpoints, but the purpose of that podcast is to help people make more and better informed health decisions. And it starts with yourself. Healthcare, the definition of healthcare is taking care of your health, not having somebody else do it for you. You have to take care of your health.
Well, the biggest problem is that, and you were talking earlier about something that really, really caught my attention, and that is that I think the pharmaceutical industry, you were talking about opioids and how people, they can't, they take these massive amounts of opioids and it leads ultimately to their destruction and death. But what the thing is that I have a lot of clients who tell me that they can't get off of the opioids because they're in too much pain. And they say, well, I can't because I just have so much pain. And you're saying that if they start exercising or do any type of activity, it's going to counterbalance whatever benefit they got out of the opioids.
Well, here's the thing, and I don't want it to seem like you're being lazy or, don't give me that. Look, I know that you're in pain, but here's the thing that we know medically, right? This is what the research says is the longer that you're on opioids, the farther you get from that initial prescription, the less it has to do, the less that your pain has to do with the actual whatever tissue damage was done originally, right? So I just started working with a guy who's been on opioids 10 years. And he's already, after 2 weeks, he's already reduced his medication. So rather than taking it 4 times a day, he's taking it twice. So, and you have to keep taking it more to get the same effect, right? So let me just ask you this. So if you're on opioids, right, what's the end goal here? Are you counting on living more than another few years? Because if you are, this is not sustainable. Having those opioids in your system that long will destroy you.
Well, Oxycontin's only supposed to be used for 3 to 5 days after a surgery, or if somebody is in stage 4 cancer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No more than 2 weeks. Yeah. No more than, or the end stage of life. Right.
Well, and this is the viciousness of the pharmaceutical industry because they're encouraging the medical establishment to encourage and promote their medications, which especially the opioids. And, we've got this opioid litigation now, but a lot of it has to do with just the marketing, and they're just marketing it as that's the answer.
But you know who's really to blame for that? It's not pharmaceuticals, it's doctors. Doctors were the ones that fell for this. Doctors were the ones that allowed themselves to be manipulated by that marketing. doctors were the ones that didn't appreciate the research that was available to them then. And I'm talking about early 80s, right? There was data then on chronic pain and exercise, but they chose to take that easy way out and prescribe it. So over, 70 to 80% of all heroin addicts, they started as an opioid prescription from a physician.
Yeah, I see a lot of that. Yeah, and it's just
pharmaceutical companies should be held accountable. But if doctors weren't so gullible under the lay of that prescription, then none of that would have happened.
Well, yeah, they're also the pharmaceutical reps come in and they have gifts, so that
you can be duped easily. I've seen it over and over again. And physicians that I don't want to say that physicians are terrible, they suck, they don't know what they're doing, because there are a fair number that just they gave these pharmaceutical companies the Heisman and just said, no, I don't. I see the ongoing problem here. I'm not going to do it. But physicians are so pressed for time, or they allow themselves to be so pressed for time, that they don't want to have to try to deal with a person's lifestyle. And that's what you have to do with somebody in chronic pain. You have to change what they eat. You got to change their exercise piece. And here's the thing, physical activity isn't enough to overcome opioids. It has to be exercise. There's a difference. Exercise is very purposeful, and it has a higher intensity component to it. And once you get the higher intensity, that's the medication that starts to overcome the opioid mechanism. Got it.
Colin, this episode flew by. It really did. I am so glad that we had you on today, and we're going to have to get you on for another episode so we can delve deeper into how seniors and elderly can really benefit from the exercise, and maybe what type, getting more into what type of exercise or other things that they can do, like you said, dancing. I mean, just things that they can do to alleviate the sitting disease. And you definitely made a great case for doing whatever it takes to get rid of sitting disease. And it definitely, like I said, it's an epidemic. And so we really, really congratulate you for all that you're doing. And we want to have you back. So Injured Senior Community, if you have any questions or issues, you can get in touch with Colin. What is your email address, Colin?
It's pretty easy. It's just ch@action30.com.
Okay. And do you have any social media out there? Or?
Yeah. You can find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, and what's the other one? Twitter.
Right.
I'm not a big Twitter fan, but I know I do post there.
Right. Well, my kids, now they do the Instagram, and they're like, Dad.
I'm on Instagram too.
Yeah. Well, they're like, Dad, Facebook is like in the past. I'm like, well, not with the Injured Senior Community, And,
no.
Yeah. So, but it's all good. All right. Well, thanks for sharing some time with us. I know you got a call coming up in another 10 minutes. So, Injured Senior Community, again, if you want to get in touch with Colin Hoobler, go ahead and you can email him or go to his website or whatever, but you can definitely get in touch with them. And if you have any questions or issues involving an injury, disease, or condition you believe has been caused by the negligence of a hospital or a doctor or a nursing home, feel free to email me at steve@injuredseniorhotline.com for a strategy session to kind of figure out if there's something we can do for you. Also, if you would like to audition to be a guest on the Injured Senior podcast, such as telling your story as an injured senior or elder, or as the loved one of an injured senior or elder, again, email me at steve@injuredseniorhotline.com, and we can talk about getting you on the show. If you like the content that was discussed today, and we had a lot of great content from Colin Hoobler, really, really good stuff. You can head on over to our show notes and find a summary of today's show, as well as important links to his website and his social media platforms. And so I invite you to go ahead and take a look at those show notes. Again, feel free to reach out to me about your own story as an injured senior or elderly individual at steve@injuredseniorhotline.com. Also, please feel free to subscribe to this podcast. We keep going every week because of support of wonderful listeners such as yourself. And if you do subscribe, please feel free to rate and review us. Thanks again for listening to today's show. Be sure to tune in for next week's show, and I will talk to you all next week. Take care and stay safe.
Thanks for listening to the Injured Senior Podcast with Steve H. Heisler. If you enjoyed the podcast, please rate, subscribe, review, and share on Apple, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts. To find out more or to get help anytime, go to injuredseniorhotline.com or call 855-622-6530. We'll see you next time.